you very much, and it's good to be here again. I was talking to Jim Harrington, I don't know if he's back in here, but we go back a ways, so this is a lot of fun. Oh, so. Okay, so yes, I'm going to be talking about a project that we started a couple of years ago that deals with eventually coming up with this restoration protection prioritization tool. And I hope that we're soliciting input, really. I mean, we're at the early stages of this particular phase of this now, which we're hoping, well, not hoping, we must finish within a year, or somebody gets fined really bad. Okay, so why do we want to develop this? Well, this is an important kind of thing to do, I think, anywhere, not just in the city of San Diego or Southern California. But basically, we're trying to figure out where should we be, where is it most valuable or most beneficial to do restoration or protection kinds of activities. So the city certainly has many sites that they have to wrestle with that are either impaired or perhaps maybe they're very good, but they don't know exactly what they should be doing. So that's the purpose of this whole project, is to figure out, develop a tool that'll help them along. All right, so restoration and protection priorities are going to be a little different, perhaps, in many cases. So that's what this table here is about. Basically, there are some factors like biological condition. What's the current biological condition of the site or segment? So for restoration, typically it's impaired. That's why you want to restore it. Whereas if for protection, it's usually a site, that's not impaired, but you want to make sure it stays not impaired, right? And so going on down the line here with the stressors, kinds of stressors you're typically dealing with, and how imminent they are, or how vulnerable the site is to them. These are all kinds of things that we have to wrestle with in this tool, and just try to basically differentiate between these two, restoration and protection. But likewise, there's actually, we think, there's some similarities here. Some factors are really in common. So for example, if there's a lot of stakeholder interest in the site, whether it's impaired or not, it may still be very a good reason to invest some resources into that, to either protect it if it's good enough or to restore it. Like also co-benefits or ecosystem goods and services, heard a little bit about that already this morning. That's certainly something that we think is important to incorporate to the extent we can. So the more co-benefits or the higher quality of co-benefits you might get may be another reason to help restore that site or prioritize that site more. And then connectivity. We heard a little bit about that this morning as well. So connectivity of aquatic habitats, that could be a very important factor as well. So there's kind of factors that we are so far considering, and I just want to stress again, this is still very much a state in progress. We're working with the regional board, we're working with SWRCB, we're working with other players, as well as, of course, the city, on this whole tool. So it's very much in development. Anyway, so these are some of the factors that we are really, at least for now, we're working with. So intensity and types of stressors. So if you have a very, stressors that are very challenging to deal with, then that may determine their prioritization there for that particular kind of site. The existing condition of the biological assemblage. How impaired is the biological assemblage? And I'll get to that a little bit later here too. Again, potential co-benefits I mentioned, connectivity. This last one, which is in kind of green, is potential for ecological lift. Okay, so that's really, I think, what we're trying to get after here. Is what's the potential that we can actually realize some real improvement or benefit or maintenance of good quality there to a given site. So what do we have to do that? So what we are doing is we are planning to incorporate at least two separate tools to get at that ecological lift question, okay? One is SCAPE, which you may have heard about, I think, which is a stream classification and priority explorer. And this is basically relying on a landscape model with this. All right, so I'm not even sure I'm pointing the right way, but this vertical line is the CSCI threshold, okay, that's being used for versus, impaired versus non-impaired. And what you're seeing here are these bars are sites that have that same sort of landscape factors, and the model would tell you that this is the CSCI scores that correspond to those kinds of sites that have those landscape constraints. So if they're on to the right side of this, they're not impaired. We could think of them as good. Whereas if they're red, they're not so good. They're below the threshold. And I have this arrow here just to point out that these upside down triangles are these are ones that are. These are underperforming. In other words, if you look at the triangle here with the arrow, that it's basically worse, it seems, in terms of CSCI score, than the rest of the sites, according to the landscape kinds of factors that it's dealing with. So, in other words, most sites in that kind of category are doing better than that site. So that site might be one that's a candidate for restoration. And that's why you see here, investigate, protect, restore. So that's one that was listed as maybe a high priority for protection. And then I have here also other ones for restoration. These ones I'm circling here are overperforming in a sense. I mean, they're performing much better than most of the sites that have the similar kind of landscape constraints. So those are ones that are doing very well relative to their peers, you might say. And so those are ones that you would probably want to really protect. You want to make sure they don't fall back down. Okay. Now the one challenge, I guess I would say, or issue with this is that you're dealing with a single threshold, which is that CSCI threshold. So you have to be careful about not having a high quality site not falling back down to the threshold. Okay, because it's actually doing way better. So what we are talking about doing is also incorporating the biological condition grading, BCG, which has been used with the biointegrity biostimulatory group. They're looking at that as well. So what you're seeing here are the different tiers or levels of biological condition. There are several folks, I'm sure, in the audience here who had quite a bit to do with the development of this for the state here. But basically, what I'm trying to show here is that you have your bright line, which is the CSCI threshold, but in addition, you have these tiers. 6 is the worst, 1 is pristine, all right? So it may be that you can do leapfrogging, or you can do just some progression here. So you might be able to restore, for example, a site. Maybe it's a tier 6 right now. It's not very good by CSCI score, but you can get it maybe up a 1 or 2 tiers with some restoration. So it may still be below our CSCI threshold desired goal, you might say, but it's progress in the right direction. And I would just say that we have seen in other places nationally where you would be maybe not surprised, but stakeholder interest can really be increased when you start seeing progressive improvement. So even though you're not getting completely to where you want to be right away, you may develop the kind of energy and local interest to really make it go further. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about doing as well. And so what we're doing is we're talking about meshing. So that we're going to take, what you have is your BCG tiers up there, 6 to 1. Again, 6 is the worst. And so here's what I showed you before. This is a site that would be maybe a good one for restoration because it's underperforming relative to its peers. But we pointed out a couple of other sites down here, which if you just use the CSCI only, you would maybe consider these low priority. But take this one, for example, right here, where it's almost at the threshold, okay? And it's actually a little better than its peers. But that one may be a good candidate for protection because you don't want it to slip back down anymore. And it might even get to the threshold or higher. So that's the kind of thing we're at least thinking about. And I'm actually going to show you the site later where that comes into play. So the framework that we have so far, all right, is that there's several inputs to this RPP tool. All right, so first is the output from what we're calling the CAS tool. This is our screening causal assessment tool that we've been developing for the past 2 years or more, with the help of the regional board, SWRCB, the city, and others actually. And so this is a tool that we've actually developed for other states. So it's one that will give us, it's a rapid screening, so it's not the be-all end-all, but it will give you some idea of what probable stressors are at that site. And it works for both protection and restoration. So we have it so that it can be used for impaired sites, looking at probable causes, but also stressor vulnerability in the case of a site that's actually fine right now. All right, so it's used both ways. And the results of that go into our RPP tool. In addition, we have, funny how I didn't print right, but anyway, this is basically the landscape constraints part of this, the habitat, what we call also biopotential. So this is where we use our biological condition gradient information, the SCAPE tool. StreamCat is also going to be, well, pretty bad. StreamCat is actually, also has metrics that you get out of that could be very useful for this, the tool as well. So we have the CAST tool output, we have the landscape output, but we also have these other outputs, which are co-benefits, socioeconomic things that might be of interest, as well as perhaps climate change, future climate change or potential climate change factors that may want to be included in this tool. So these are the main inputs to the RPP tool, and then from this we're going to be identifying and prioritize a prioritized list of what we think is really should be top priority for restoration and or protection. So what we have at the moment is what we're calling three categories of inputs really here to the RPP tool. One is what we're calling potential, and that is things like the stressors, how intense, how much, what kinds of stressors at the site, and landscape constraints. So this is, for example, the SCAPE tool, the BCG comes in, as well as the CAST tool output, the causal assessment output. So happening here, so if you have fewer landscape constraints, or they're easier to manage types of stressors, then yeah, that should be something that we think is going to lend it to be higher priority. Then we have another category, threats or vulnerability. Okay, so this is things like maybe future or projected population growth, or other land use changes that may impact that stream. Or it could be climate change too as well. So these are threats or vulnerability. Again, here too, if it's a good site, and but you're projecting that it's going to have some land use changes that might be detrimental, that may be one that's high priority for protection, for example. And then we have opportunities. That's the third category. So that's basically other elements that support restoration and or protection. So this is where stakeholder interest, co-benefits, that there's environmental justice kinds of concerns. That's where this would fit in. Okay, so those are the kinds of categories we have. And then, again, this is preliminary, but what I have here are the input factors that I'm listing here. This is the kinds of things I've just been telling you, where they fit in, which of the three categories, okay? And each of these things would be scored in different ways. And I'm giving you also the spatial scale, which is different for some of these things, as well as the source of information. So likewise, again, the potential stressors, that comes from this screening causal assessment tool. We get the StreamCat, SCAPE, BCG tiers would be more for the current land use constraints and so forth. And then on down. Now I have in yellow the socioeconomic influences and the co-benefits, because we think at this point we're not likely to have quantitative information on that could be readily put into an automated tool. But those are things that a user might know something about. And so the idea is to, at least at this point, is to try to make some of these things user input. The user decides how important that particular factor is or what they know about it. And we still have to work this out, but that's the idea there. And then we have future land use. We have at least a placeholder for that, which can be actually, there are ways to get at that, but we'll have to see. The climate change at the bottom there, we'll see how that goes. Right now, most of the climate change models that we're aware of are regional. They're for a very large region, so it's not clear yet whether we can use that for specific sites within a region or watersheds, but we'll work on that. That's something for discussion. So I'm going to show you 3 sites just to show you how we're thinking about this anyway. This is not written in stone. And I have extra slides, which I didn't think I'd have time for, I probably won't, but would actually talk a little bit about the preliminary scoring idea. So I'm not going to show you the scoring, because frankly we haven't talked about it yet, really, as a group. It's just a demonstration, but this may help. So here's a site. Okay, this one is near Poway in Southern California, in San Diego County. This one has a CSCI score of 0.8, so it's above the threshold, just barely. And so it would be considered, I think, unimpaired. But notice that it's actually located near a lot of red or pink, kinds, which is basically either low, mid to high density, growth there, population. So it's very close to a lot of things. This is one where we're saying the watershed activity, available co-benefits is not such a major factor. We're just going to assume that now for the user. And that this is, it's not identified in any kind of a watershed master plan, or a WQIP, watershed quality implementation plan. It hasn't been thought about too much, okay? So we're just going to say that for here. But clearly there are threats. I mean, there's future land use, and we'd probably swallow that site. So that's where that site stands, but it's unimpaired at the moment. The second site I'm going to show you is one this is near Temecula, so a little further north, but it's Southern California as well. And this is another one that's very close, almost right on, Temecula. It's right on a real town, a real city. And even though right where it is, it's not, such bad land uses, it's very, very close. It's very much threatened. And this one has a CSCI score of 0.56, so this one would be classified as impaired based on the threshold. All right. Now, I did mention it, the last one, I think habitat was the only stressor that came up through the CAS tool. This one, both altered flow metrics and habitat came up as stressors in the CAS tool. So there are different ones here. And then the third site is this is one that's very close to the threshold. The CSCI is 0.77. This is mostly has different habitat constraints. In this case, I think it was mostly fine sediment. And some of the other ones was both riparian kinds of things and other habitat metrics. We actually have which habitat metrics were the ones that were probably responsible for causing the stressor, for causing the impairment. So in this case, again, slightly impaired. The stressors might be manageable via B&Ps, we think. Again, there's landscape constraints somewhat here, but the biopotential could be better here, according to other ones in its peers, either based on SCAPE or based on the BCG. The watershed, we're saying in this case, the watershed activity is pretty high. People are interested in the stream. There's a local interest group perhaps. There's some co-benefits that could be realized here, recreational or otherwise. And then this has been one that's been recognized in the WMP, so the master plan. So it's one that people are looking at. See, but the population pressure is very high. So actually, in all 3 of these, the population pressures is a factor. Okay, so again, I'm not going to show you the scoring, but if there's time, we can show you some of the scoring things. So again, all preliminary. But basically, this is really interesting how it doesn't convey very well here. Okay. Anyhow, the idea we're thinking about is that the user can weight these factors differently as to how they see it, what's appropriate to them. So, for example, if they thought that certain watershed interest, socioeconomic factors, those sorts of things are very important to them, they could weight those more, and that would, of course, affect the score. So if anybody's familiar at all with the EPA's recovery potential tool, it's a little like that, okay? Except this is geared more towards California. All right, so the 3 sites, A, B, and C, are along the top with their associated CSCI scores I gave you. Okay, I know you don't have in front of you again. Most of these had habitat constraints. I think it was B that also had altered flow as a good score. So what we're looking at here is the potential. That was one of the factors. I have 11 points, and there's nothing sacred about that, okay? But basically the way it comes out, if you look at the scoring I happen to use, the stream A came out pretty high. In other words, it's good. It's one that looks like it ought to be considered priority in that respect. Whereas the stream B, not so much. It had a lot of landscape constraints, a much lower CSCI score. It may not be as high priority. When you look at opportunities, okay, that's the one, if you remember, stream C was the one that had a lot of watershed interest. It was in the WMP and so on. So that one gets a high score for that because of the way the points work and the way the user wants to weight that. And then finally with threads, they all have threads, and it's about the same. So that was sort of a wash here. But when you add it all up, if that's how we do this, basically you're seeing actually this one stream C, which is not, it's currently slightly impaired according to the threshold, CSCI threshold, but it's one that might score high based on this kind of scoring. So I've just been told to stop. So I think that's it. If there's any time for questions, I'll take those. Thanks.
Yes, thank you for your presentation. I'm curious about those sites that would be categorized as constrained, yet they are scoring higher. Have you tried to explain or look into what is causing that?
What is causing a site that's constrained to score higher?
Particularly with the ones that were at the bottom of the chart that you showed there.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Well, a lot depends on what it's exactly constrained by. Okay, what exact factors, right? So for some of them, it's certain habitat factors that may be constraining them that through BMPs of some sort or otherwise, there may be ways to rectify that. I would say that probably if you're dealing with a concrete line channel, maybe not so much. There's not a whole lot you can do with that kind of constraint. There's some variability with the kinds of constraints that you can have here. So, but it's a good question. It's something that we have to look at, for sure.
So I think that when you were talking about the threats increase the score. So what I'm wondering is it truncated in some fashion on the top? Is there a mechanism for deciding that the threats are so great that right. It's not worth it? It's not worth it, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's right. No, actually, it isn't exactly, I made it maybe look like if threats increases, it's a much higher priority. That's not the case at all. What I'm thinking there is that if it's a site that's very, very good, okay, but it's vulnerable to a lot of threats, is that high priority for protection? That's what we're asking. Okay.
Is there a way, or does it make sense to incorporate cost into the model as to what would need to be like the
Cost. It's funny. Well, of course, we haven't discussed all this yet. Okay. I will be candid. I originally had cost as a consideration, and things like accessibility. A lot of logistical things, right? I was, and this is just internally among my group, okay? I was told, throw that out. No, we don't want to do that. And I'm sure I'll be talking to Chad Laughlin later here, and we'll see what the regional board also thinks about that. For sure, there are practical things too, of course, here. But I think the way we, at least with the city, have been looking at this is that for now, let's hold off on that and just say, in a perfect world, I mean, what are the sites that biologically, ecologically, we should be looking at here? And then let's see after that if we have to then go through a second stage there and start looking at things like accessibility and so on.
I keep thinking about like the difference between a site and a watershed, and I'm thinking that if you're going to implement this on a watershed scale, how do you interpolate between, in areas that are unmonitored? Is there a process for that?
Good question. So far, the CAS tool gives you output for a site. All right. And depending on the density of biological sites we have in a given area, we may be able to do what you're saying. The issue, I think, we'll see, is that for some of these areas, the density is very low. So we don't know a whole lot, and for some of them, the segments are miles long, right? But we are talking, however, about, I only showed you quickly that one slide about the scale, right? And for some of them, we're talking catchment watershed level. And I know there's interest in looking at least a catchment level, not just the site. And that's why we wanted to kind of look at things like connectivity, some other factors to see, all right, maybe that should play in here to whether that you know, the catchment or maybe the watershed, should be, you know, looked at that way. Yeah, good question.
So building on that just a little bit, Lori's question, how do you factor in the number of samples you might have? So you might have one site that's been measured a lot of times, have a lot of consistency in the biological condition at that exact location or in the reach.
Right.
And so does your tool kind of consider the variation in your actual sample versus the predicted scores?
Okay, well the CAS tool, again, the screening causal assessment tool does what you're saying. It takes every sample that was taken in that site. And then it's basically, we can get very different results by the way, but that'll be fine. You know, the stressors are not necessarily the same for each, even though it's the same site and everything, and they may have only been a few years apart. But we are dealing with that in the CAS tool. Now, from that, then we get whatever output was from that, the best we can say about the stressors that we think are causing whatever. And then from there, we're going into this RPP tool, and you know that's only just one point, one factor, I should say, one piece of the RPP tool. The other part is the landscape, constraints, habitat, and like I said, the other thing. So it's something to work on for sure. I mean, we haven't figured out exactly how, you know, when you have multiple samples at a site, you know, how I mean, I would say this much. I mean, if we have multiple samples at a site, we feel much more confident about what's going on. But unfortunately, so far, at least in what we've looked at, very often, I would say more often than not, most of the sites we have had one sample, at least biologically.